Welcome to Vital Life Energy Formulas. Vital Life Energy Formulas question and answers platform today. We do not treat, diagnose, cure, profess a cure of any sort of disease. I'm going to start the questions and answer meeting for those following Vital Life Energy Formulas, and thank you all for being on the meeting today with our most recent newsletter. And then I already have a question that has come through for me to respond through the understanding of vital life energy and the functional anatomy with amino acids, vitamins, minerals that make a healthy DNA protein. So our newsletter that we just put out this week on toxic protein versus healthy DNA proteins. Toxic proteins come from chemicals that we are exposed to in the air, food, and water. Most of us know of those toxic chemicals as heavy metals. Chelation and methylation are means to bind and carry and remove toxic chemicals. The Vital Life Energy formulas can activate the healthy DNA proteins, for they are the individual single forms of amino acids, vitamins, minerals to make a new protein. The very versatile amino acids in the Vital Life Energy program can stimulate the liver's methylation and chelate minerals in the bloodstream. They can bind to chemical, they carry the minerals into the cells, tissue structure, balance pH, acid balance to keep body pH neutral, helps regulate body processes and enzyme systems, and help nerve impulse transmission as well as muscular contractions. They remove toxin. Methylation is the liver's ability to regulate, mediate, and adapt to its constantly changing environment. Healthy DNA proteins are the individual single forms of protein to make a healthy DNA protein and remove the toxic proteins. There are 6 different forms of DNA healthy proteins. 1, hormonal DNA protein, the structural healthy DNA protein, transport healthy DNA proteins, enzyme healthy DNA protein, antibody healthy DNA protein, and reserve healthy DNA proteins. The carrier in our blood, our minerals, is the life spark, as Jefferson Campbell has taught, are our amino acids, the free-form amino acids. Vitamins and minerals are cofactors and precursors with amino acids to produce natural growth hormone. Growth hormone activators from the combination of amino acids, vitamins, and minerals is the cerebral spinal fluid to our brain. Our brain sends the HGH, human growth hormone, down from the pituitary gland, our master gland, to stimulate all the endocrine glands to release our natural growth hormone. So to carry on from that reading of the newsletter that we most recently sent out to everyone, is a lot of questions coming up right now about estrogen and when estrogen levels drop through the hormonal changes, as well as the high estrogen dominance that a lot of young women are having, which is the endometriosis or the fibroids, and also cysts and polyps that can happen in the cervix or the uterus. A little bit different when there's polycystic ovaries, because that's connected to the myometrium of the uterus and higher levels of testosterone, where a woman does not release and have a regular ovulation, meaning there's no period when there's no ovulation. Now, understanding estrogen, which is, of course, we share a lot about how excess estrogen that we're all having a high dominance of, where chemicals mimic xenoestrogen. And that is in males as well as females. Females, we naturally build up estrogen to stimulate the pituitary thyroid down to the ovary for the egg to be released. That continues even when there is no more eggs to bleed. We still need to activate the natural estradiol, the estrogen within the liver, and the estradiol, which is in the myometrium and the endometrium of the uterus, with the colon as a female to move the lymph. Even when there's no more egg to ovulate, to either obviously create life, which is sperm to penetrate the egg, or to fluff off the lining of the uterus, and or for a female that doesn't have any more eggs to fluff off the lining and remove the toxin in our menstrual cycle, is to move that lymph, because the uterus and colon work together, and they are muscles, a very important muscle. One of the most active muscles in the female body is the uterus muscle. First, the eye muscle is the most active muscle in the human body, then the heart muscle, and third most active muscle in the female body is the uterus, which is the reason as females, no matter how old we are, we need to help the blood flow down into that cervix that contracts every single day with the moon cycle, and the muscle internally that moves with the colon to draw everything up internally and move our lymph. Understanding estrogen, E1, estrone, our liver. Every hormone is metabolized and broken down in the liver. E2, estradiol, the endometrium of the lining of the uterus, as well as the ovaries. And then E3, estradiol, the ovaries, as well as the bone marrow. The key to understanding about estrogen is our body's assimilation of our good estrogen and the dopamine with our natural estrogen. So it's not just estrogen that we build up to ovulate and create life. It's also dopamine in our pituitary gland. That dopamine is made 80% in the ascending and transverse colon. The understanding of the uterus muscle to the colon muscle and our ovulation. When there's enough dopamine that we build up, along with the estrogen, the E1, the E2, the E3, and 80% of our natural estradiol is the E3, the bone marrow, the ovaries. The 10% of our total estrogen, estradiol, is the endometrium of the lining of the uterus, as well as the ovaries. E1, estrone, the liver, which, as we were sharing, that the liver breaks down all of these growth hormones. What's happening today, because our liver is being bombarded by so much environmental poisoning in our food, air, and water, then there is more of a xenoestrogen dominance that our body, our liver specifically, is producing, because chemical is foreign to nature. It's not part of nature. So nature then starts to produce more of that xenoestrogen, that hormone, xenoestrogen. It starts to produce more of it because it's foreign, thinking that it needs to activate more of that xenoestrogen to protect the cells. So it's got to go somewhere. It doesn't stay in the bloodstream. Nature's incredibly intelligent and doesn't keep it in the bloodstream, so it moves it on. The estradiol, which is 10% of the total estrogen, along with E1, estrone, 10% of the total estrogen. Estradiol is only 10%, but the body mimics the xenoestrogen that builds up the E2, the estradiol, that accumulates in the internal uterus muscle, affecting the lining, which of course the cells can then revert back in and attach and wrap around the ovary or go into the intestinal lining, and can also go up into the lungs. So a lot of young women are having endometriosis showing up in the lungs. Now, why? The question is, why endometriosis, endometriosis in the lining of the lungs? And of course, it's estrogen. The lining of the lungs and the alveoli of the lungs, in nature, the villi of your intestine, the lining of the intestine and the villi of your intestine, the endometrium of the lining of your uterus are connected. How? through the lining of your lungs, inhalation, exhalation, assimilation, elimination, ovulation, right? Estrogen, assimilation, enough dopamine, pituitary signals to the thyroid down to the ovary releases the egg, progesterone, the elimination, assimilation, the first half of the cycle, elimination, the second half of the cycle. The lungs, inhalation, exhalation. The colon, assimilation, elimination, the GI tract. So what's out of balance is the rhythm of inhalation, exhalation, assimilation, elimination. What the Vital Life Energy formulas are doing is they're activating the biorhythms with your immune response to your ovulation. And again, as we shared, it does not matter how old you are, that cycle still continues, even when we are in the medical terms as menopause. There's the first stage of our femininity where we build up the natural estradiol and the dopamine builds up and the thyroid from the pituitary sends a signal down to that ovary squeezes, releases the egg through the fallopian tube to move into the cervix. And then the progesterone levels come in. If there's sperm to fertilize that egg and create life, then progesterone, it jumps. It has to go from 20 milligrams and it has to move up to 200 milligrams in that first 12 weeks. If there's no sperm to fertilize, then your immune response is sending out the T cells, because our ovulation and our immune system work together. The thymus, right where the lungs are, right in between the lungs, right there at the sternum, is sending the T cells out, the intelligent immune cells, to recognize whatever we've been exposed to at the beginning of the cycle, so that we build antibodies and remove it at the end of the cycle. Now, why does nature do that? Nature does that for the next ovulation, the next egg. If there is sperm present to fertilize that egg, that the offspring that we reproduce is stronger than ourselves. It's incredibly intelligent how our cycles work. If we're not having our immune response, our stem cells within the bone marrow regenerate and the thymus maturing those T cells when we ovulate, and if there's no sperm to fertilize and create life, and the thymus is then sending out those T cells and producing antibodies and removing the toxin when we start our menstrual cycle, then the cells change. Nature's just trying to take care of you. It's waiting for you to be able to remove those cells. It's wanting you to open up the other pathways of elimination. It's wanting you to give it the nutrients that it needs. It's wanting you to understand your individual cycle and what you need as an individual and your own boundaries. So what women are going through, and doesn't matter again what age, because what I'm sharing is also continuing even if there is no more egg to bleed. There is still a cycle for us. We need to keep the pelvic area open. Dr. Stone's saying, he shares, keep the head cool, keep the bowels open, keep the feet warm, and you can hope for a long life. He also shares about no wise woman or girl will get their feet or allow their feet to get damp or cold, because there's a connection between the feet and the uterus. Your foot baths and the Epsom salt foot baths are a very important part of your program. The foot baths, particularly for us females, for our feet, are connected to the reproductive glands. They're also the negative pole of the brain. So when we're soaking our feet, which we can't soak our brain, by soaking our feet, we're also connecting our feet and soaking the brain. We're drawing any inflammation that's up in the brain down away from the brain and drawing that toxin out through the lymph nodes at the bottom of the feet. So the question came to me about estrogen and, the program, neutralizing estrogen. And when women go through the hormonal change, when women are going through the hormonal change, then the estrogen drops, and that's true, but it's about assimilating it. So then you've got the other areas that come into play because all of these glands work together. It's not one part, it's everything works together functionally. So our hormone for our adrenals and our kidneys are an important part of our assimilation of our good estrogen, our estradiol for the bone marrow to turn over so we're not losing bone density. And it starts with the sun. That sunlight, and remember the eyes closed, looking at the sun for 2 minutes. The eyes being closed, looking at the sun for 2 minutes, that light absorption through the eyelids into the pituitary, and then the liver produces vitamin D from the sun. It sends that vitamin D in the blood to our kidneys, to our adrenals, and it sends it there to stimulate the hormone within the kidneys that are essential for the body to assimilate calcium in the intestine, calcium, sodium, and minerals that our natural estrogen's made up of. So when we're talking about lowering estrogen, we're talking about the chemical that's mimicking estrogen. We're talking about the xenoestrogen that none of us need. We need to assimilate our good estrogen, and we need to remove the excess estrogen that our body is being bombarded by, that the liver is mimicking more xenoestrogen from the chemicals. And we do not want that chemical building up because it affects the blood dilation of our blood vessels. It can accumulate in the ACE2 receptors. It affects the homeostasis of our biological function of our body. Progesterone is what we're helping you all with too, the opposite to the minerals that our natural estrogen's made up of, magnesium, potassium. Those two minerals, the life spark of the minerals, are the amino acids. They're the carrier. So the adrenals, along with the kidneys, are an important part of our assimilation of our good estrogen. They also transport from our adrenals the hormone to the hypothalamus, which is also an important part of our hormonal balance of our estrogen, because that hypothalamus regulates our blood pressure, our body temperature, our heartbeat, our water balance, our appetite. So you can see it's not one gland when we're out of balance hormonally, whether it's through hot flushes, irritability, painful menstrual cycles, endometriosis causing spasming, regardless where the spasming is, right? There's a connection between the lungs above, the colon below, the diaphragm. Well, if you look where your diaphragm is, you'll see right behind where the diaphragm is right where your adrenals and your kidneys sit. So you can see that's the balance of the air above to the breath below the diaphragm, an important part of your endocrine system to your brain. So the adrenals uptake the hormone to the hypothalamus, the luteinizing hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, the pineal, our melatonin cycle within the pineal, not just for sleep, for every daylight waking hour and sleep cycle. That pituitary then gets the dopamine, and that dopamine in the pituitary, an important part to stimulate the thyroid, the T3, T4, TSH in the thyroid, the thymus and the maturity of the T cells in the thymus to send it back down again to those ovaries, first to your cervix. Your cervix regulates the cycle. Every day our cervix has to have the blood flow through those blood vessels and the blood circulation down through those blood vessels and in the arteries, into the lining of the cervix, which contracts every single day with the moon cycle. They talk about Kegels and how important they are, right, for when women give birth and helping that whole reproductive area tighten up and draw in. That's the reason native cultures and dancing and moving the hips keeps that area healthy. That's the prana, the life breath. That's the energy, breathing past the diaphragm, because we all tend to hold our breath. getting the breath past the diaphragm, bringing the breath, the prana, the life breath past the diaphragm and bringing it down into your pelvic area, blowing up that pelvic area, squeezing the reproductive area, squeezing it, and then exhaling out and releasing all the air out through your mouth, relaxing the jaw, because there's a connection between the jaw and your pelvis. As Dr. Stone shows, the lines of the jaw down to the pelvis, down to your hips. The psoas muscle connected to the diaphragm, back to the adrenals again. The umbilicus, the center of the body, to the top of the head, to the bottom of your feet. The psoas connects from your diaphragm to your pelvis, back to the pelvis, to the cervix that regulates your ovaries. Each day, blood flow, just like for a male, circulation has to move down to the prostate to activate the testosterone in the testes daily. The cervix contracts every single day with the moon cycle. So removing these toxic chemicals is essential for our entire hormonal balance and our entire cycle. And that's what the program is helping us all do. The healthy DNA proteins, the Vital Life Energy formulas are helping each of us to build back up these healthy DNA proteins, which these toxic proteins are affecting. The transport, that's the methylation. The healthy DNA transport proteins is what the amino acid Vital Life Energy formulas are helping our liver for methylation, for chelation, so that the minerals aren't just sitting in the blood and calcifying, they're moving to the bone, they're moving to the nerves, they're moving to the tissue, they're moving into the muscle, they're moving into the brain. They're setting up the pathways to that melatonin and the serotonin pathway. They're activating the hypothalamus and the luteinizing hormone from the hypothalamus to send it down into the lining of the uterus and stimulate some free testosterone that we women need too in the myometrium of our uterus. It's all balance, and understanding the entire system works together in rhythm and in harmony, in synchronization with our immune response. So I'm going to take questions now. That was just the first part. We're recording today's meeting, and the soaking of the feet is important. Okay. Any questions? Right now, I'm not taking them on. We're recording the meeting, and anyone can put it on the Q&A, and I can share the understanding of Vital Life. When we talk about chelation, I know there was a question about chelation. Chelation therapy is used to remove heavy metal poisoning, binds to toxins, which is, of course, what the most recent newsletter is talking about. It's also important for chelation is for the minerals like the iron to move into the bone marrow. So when a person has not enough iron and they have, say, thalassemia, where they can't take iron because they don't absorb it, or they have hemochromatosis where there is excess iron, all has to go to the understanding of chelation within the liver, that the liver needs the carrier of the minerals, the life spark of the mineral, our amino acids. I had somebody earlier today who has endometriosis and has very painful cycles, and her hair was falling out and she was having a lot of pain, and then gained all this excess weight. Of course, that deals with what I was talking about with the sun and how vitamin D in the liver and goes to our adrenals, and our adrenals that produce a hormone, along with our kidneys that regulate water and salt balance, which you can see how that's important for our hormonal balance. So her hair is growing back, which she was having, her hair falling out and losing a lot of hair. So she wasn't getting enough new red blood cells. Now, last week's newsletter was about blood plasma. And 55% of our blood is plasma. The other 45% is red blood cells. And the plasma is what carries our nutrients in the blood. So when a person has their hair starting to fall out, there's not enough red blood cells, there's not enough plasma actually carrying enough of the nutrients to move into the hair follicle. Now, why is the body losing hair? Because red blood cells to circulate oxygen is the priority in the blood to the heart, to the lungs, to the brain. So the body starts attacking the hair follicle in order to get enough of the amino acids within the liver to produce the plasma and the red blood cells. Red blood cells are made not just in the bone marrow, but also in the liver. Now, when we're dealing with our estrogen, which is the lining of the uterus and the ovaries, the E2 and E3, the bone marrow makes our white blood cells, platelets, red blood cells, T cells. So you can see how important the cortex of the ovaries are to the bone marrow of our hips. And the turnover of new cells within the bone marrow of the hips, but one other area, the bone marrow up in the shoulder blades. Now, how is that connected? And why are these areas so important with the turnover of stem cells, T cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets? Because of lymphatic vessels. We females have double the lymph than men do. We have much more lymph to move around the body than men do. That's the reason we have a huge uterus muscle, a pear-shaped muscle, the uterus, where a male has a tiny little prostate gland. That is because we have much more lymph. That lymph is our hormone. That lymph is our immune system. And nature gave us more of that lymph for us to be around longer to take care of the offspring. The lymphatic vessels down in the groin connect to the sigmoid, connect to the ileosacral valve. They're also moving down our arms, which is the reason we have more breast tissue than men. So the thymus and the shoulder blades in the back, where the bone marrow and the hips connected to the cortex of the ovaries, the thymus to the shoulders, the thymus right in the middle of the chest. When a baby is born and then starts to latch on and suckle on the nipple, not only is that breast milk incredibly beneficial, obviously, for the baby and the development of the brain of the baby is 3 years, 2 to 3 years, but it's also for the mother, the thymus. The thymus expands. The oxytocin gets released from the mother's milk to go into the baby, but also for the mother. That continues even when we go through the changes hormonally from the first stage of our femininity to the second stage of our femininity. And actually more oxytocin is being released into our heart as a female that doesn't have an egg to release to bleed anymore, because nature wants that wisdom and that love, that oxytocin, to spread to the next generation. The question is a lot of hair, too, and yes, the endometriosis. See, what's happening is it's affecting the blood flow into the lining of the uterus. It's affecting the blood flow into the cervix. It's affecting the blood vessels. And so because the blood vessels are being affected, because the estradiol, the xenoestrogen and the estradiol is smothering the lining, doesn't matter where or what lining it is. It doesn't have to be a specific lining. It could be the cervix, it could be the uterus, it could be the ovary, it could be the lining of the intestine, the lining of the lungs. It's smothering it, so it's affecting the dilation of the blood vessels to carry oxygen. So because there's less blood flow moving through those particular blood vessels, then what's happening is the body needs more new red blood cells because it's constriction of blood flow, and that's the reason the hair starts to fall out. It knows it's got to have the red blood cells, it's got to have the plasma, which 92% of blood plasma is water, and that goes back to what I was sharing about in relationship to the kidneys and the adrenals, and the sodium and the water balance. You can see how it's all connected. It's not one part. It's the ovaries, adrenals, pituitary, hypothalamus, pineal, thyroid, parathyroid gland is an important part of this too, to the thymus, our liver that regulates it all, the most feminine organ. The best time, the question is when is the best time during your cycle to do foot baths? Well, definitely when you're menstruating. You don't want to get in the bath when you're eliminating, you're in your menstrual flow, because you're sitting, you're eliminating. So you don't want to be sitting in the bath when you're menstruating. So the best time is definitely through your menstrual flow. If you do tend to get, say, more premenstrual pain and or headaches, that's the week before the menstrual flow, is doing them, leading up to the menstrual cycle. So any time is good to do the foot baths, but definitely when you're actually menstruating to help drain and draw and pull more toxin out. And also if you are experiencing any irritability, depression, and you're getting headaches, that's really where you want to do the foot baths. It's a good question, but any time is good to do the foot baths. And as I was actually going to share earlier, I had a lady, a new person on, who's a dancer, and she does the Epsom salt baths, and she's a ballerina. And I shared with her, because this is something we learned from the London ballerina, we learned that this is what they did, is they do ice foot soaks. So that's because they're on their toes. And so with Australia, with the heat that you've been having, and obviously we're moving into summer, you don't have to do the hot foot bath. You can do it warm or cool. And I know Dr. Stone talks about keeping the feet warm, but you can then do cooler foot bath when it's hot. And then you can also do your casserole pack. So you can do your casserole pack on your lower abdomen, and you can also do it on the lower back, or on the back where the kidneys and the adrenals are. So there's the warmth. And then you can do a cooler foot bath too, right? Particularly if you're on your toes and dancing. There's a question asking about taking ivermectin for helping cure endometriosis, and taking it for 2 weeks and then 3 weeks off and then 2 weeks again. Now, ivermectin is a worming, parasitical drug. Jeff has always taught, like in Africa, they call a virus a parasite. And that's one of the first treatments that they go to, is ivermectin. And it's not just one person that takes the ivermectin, because they know if one person's infected, the whole household will eventually get it. So everybody takes it. Understanding the endometriosis and the excess estrogen. Now, remember, we build up estrogen to ovulate, to eliminate. So in that elimination is going to be what? Parasites, viruses, funguses, mold, bad bacteria, chemical, and emotion. That's going to be in the elimination. So it is an anti-parasitical worming drug. And yes, it is going to remove any parasites. If we have a high estrogen dominance, then we have more bad bacteria, more fungus, more mold and or parasites and or viruses. We can have more of those things. Heat, light, and oxygen. Viruses, funguses, mold, bad bacteria, chemical, we remove. The viruses, the funguses, the mold, the bad bacteria, we kill off. We need some bad bacteria, but heat, light, and oxygen. Your program is covering all three things. Amino acids, light. Your Epsom salts, light. The sunlight that we talk about with your 2 minutes closed, with your eyes closed, light. The oxygen, amino acids. The oxygen, the hydrogen peroxide that we talk about. The oxygen, your vitamin C, bioflavonoid, AB, KB formula, PT formula. The oxygen. Vitamin C, the bioflavonoids are important for the flexibility, the pliability of your blood vessels. The heat, your castoral packs. The light, your castoral packs. The oxygen, amino acids. Your oxygen, the cofactors, vitamins and minerals. The oxygen, your liver. Your oxygen, the bone marrow, the stem cells, the amino acids. Vitamin D, that's why we're big promoters of the castor oil packs. I know they can be messy. Don't use as much castor oil. The castor oil, naturally in the castor oil is vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin K, and vitamin E. It's another way to get the light. The little crystals of Epsom salts, not magnesium flakes or magnesium salts, Epsom salts. In nature, the bubbling up and the healing mineral springs, which is our liver, is our healing spring, is the sulfur bubbling up from the core of the earth. The heat, your castoral packs. The heat, as we do the different treatments. The heat, your immune response from your amino acids. That's what a fever is, fever cure. If you maintain a fever, it burns up the virus, it burns up the parasite, it activates your immune response, and you get stronger by building antibodies. Sometimes we need to take something because we're not able to maintain the fever and it goes too high. So the excess estrogen, yes, creates a good environment for viruses, funguses, parasites, mold, and bacteria to bind to, attach, adhere to, and grow inside of us. We want them down and out. We want them to move down and out. We don't want to be reabsorbing them. The portal system, a very important part of the colon, the portal veins. The portal veins that go from the colon back to the liver carry nutrients. But if the lining is smothered with all this excess estrogen that's affecting the blood vessels in where the lymphatic vessels are that connect directly to the sigmoid area of the bowel and to the ileosacral valve, then that's going to affect the portal system that carries the nutrient directly back to your liver. The umbilicus, the center of the body, the diaphragm that balances the air above and the breath above to the breath below. Right where the kidneys do also, because they filter the carbon dioxide out of the blood to carry more oxygen back into the bloodstream. The kidneys are essential for stimulating the bone marrow to turn over red blood cells. So the hormone within the kidneys and the adrenals with the ovaries and the cervix that regulates the ovaries to the pituitary, to the thyroid, the hypothalamus in the back of the brain, the luteinizing hormone to the pineal and the melatonin cycle, to the thyroid function of the TSH from the pituitary to the TSH, T3, T4, and the parathyroid that regulates your calcium, along with your thymus, that is the diamond soul, being the thymus gland is the diamond soul, and also influences the melatonin cycle. So back to where it starts from the pineal to the pituitary down.